Hey everybody, Plushie here, and a little bit over a week later, finally we will be tackling Andromeda in this latest hot take video. I feel like I definitely could have pushed it out a little bit earlier, but because of real life scheduling and me being a little bit lazy, yeah, we're here once again, and I apologize as usual. Maybe someday I'll finally make a hot take video in time. But yeah, Andromeda, people's opinions on her are quite split because she's once again trying to be a tank servant, and we all know how unpopular this archetype of servant is nowadays, but I do think her kit is designed pretty interestingly and she might have some potential. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video on Andromeda. So looking at her base stats, the one thing that immediately pops out is her very low attack stat and very high HP stat. I'm pretty sure she has the lowest attack stat out of all riders, SSRs, and the highest HP out of all SSR riders. So it does make sense for her archetype, but she is also trying to be a DPS servant, so I feel like this ends up hurting her. Other than that, you know, she has pretty standard, slightly above average, I'd say, MP gain because of her double quick double arts deck. And yeah, I am going to once again complain that I would rather have a double buster deck because I do think she has some kind of offensive potential, but this really, you know, kind of reduces that potential once again, just like her attack stat. Andromeda's first skill is a 15 star bomb as well as a 15 star per turn generation effect for 3 turns. It's also a 3 turn 1000 damage cut, and finally it is also a 30 MP battery, all on a 6 turn cooldown. So honestly, I really like this skill. You know, this skill has both instant stars as well as a sustained source of star generation. Especially considering she's a rider, she's gonna be able to utilize these stars very consistently. This also is a 1000 damage cut for 3 turns that is not hit dependent, and it is especially significant on Andromeda, which we'll see why very soon. Combos very well with her MP as well. And finally, this is a 30 MP battery, which is always pretty nice, you know, for farming and challenge quests in order to make her use her MP just more and faster in general. So overall, I like this skill a lot. Makes her really tanky, gives her a lot of stars as a rider, and of course, having a battery. Andromeda's second skill is a 3-turn taunt to herself, and also it grants herself a 1-time 3-turn guts that revives her with 3000 HP, and then finally it gives her a buff that allows her to get 10 MP charge as well as 10% crit up for 3 turns whenever she gets hit by the enemy. This also has a 6-turn cooldown. So this is essentially Andromeda's main gimmick skill. Basically what she wants to do is to constantly get hit by the enemies and get a bunch of crit buffs as well as MP charge to loop her MP more consistently in a challenge quest scenario. Now I do think the guts is a little bit misplaced because we all know the funny interaction with taunted guts. Essentially, instead of completely stopping all enemy actions, it will just skip an enemy action. So if the first attack, for example, breaks the guts, the second attack will still come in and probably kill her if the damage is neutral, depending on if you have your MP up or not, which we'll get into a little bit later why that's important. But in general, I think taunted guts is kind of a bad idea. I would have rather taken like a 1-turn invul effect, for example, to allow her to at least get 1 free turn. Now for solos, this is pretty nice, and the clock effect, which allows her to gain crit damage for 3 turns whenever she gets hit, as well as MP gauge, looks very strong on paper, especially for the crit, because like at max you can get 90% crit up for a turn, and on average you're still getting like 50 to 60% crit up for 3 turns. It just has a different spread where it goes like 30, 60, 90, and then 60, 30, you know? So it doesn't look that bad on paper, but once again, you have to remember you are taking hits from the enemy in order to get this crit buff. You're not immediately getting it, so this does hamper her DPS utility, at least in my opinion. But overall, you know, at least the cooldown matches the first skill. The damage cut very much helps her a lot because of that taunt, because she might just be taking 9 attacks throughout the entirety of the 3 turns of this skill duration. So yeah, once again, nice combo with the first skill, a little bit questionable with the guts. And finally, Andromeda's third skill is a 30% quick and arts double buff for 3 turns, as well as a 30% MP damage up for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. So very simple and straightforward, pretty nice numbers, honestly. 30% quick up and 30% MP damage up for the MP damage boost is a pretty nice number just on one skill, and the arts up certainly helps with her other 2 arts cards for MP generation, but unfortunately, once again, you know, because she is more focused on quick arts instead of quick buster, her DPS potential is quite hampered. Looking at her passives, she actually has a couple of unique passives exclusive to herself, so they're always interesting to look at. She has Riding A+, which is an 11% quick boost, which is really useful for her because she's an AoE quick servant, especially because of her abysmal attack stat. She can use that damage boost whenever she can. She also has Magic Resistance C, which is a little bit too low of a number to treat as a, you know, significant effect, but, you know, as always, it will help her to dodge some debuffs, you know, a little bit easier. She has Desire for Hero, which is a unique passive that gives her 10% attack up for 3 turns whenever a Guts triggers. This is a horrible passive on her because of her game plan being mainly just to tank damage for the 3 turns the taunt is up. You don't actually ever want the Guts on her second skill to trigger, especially because of Taunted Guts' weird interactions. She might still die even after the Guts trigger on the same turn. So yeah, it's not a great passive at all. It's not like she's a Guts spamming survival servant either, even in solo. So, you know, with such a measly payoff at 10% attack up for 3 turns, this is absolutely not worth it. This would be a way better passive on someone like Herc or Tyra, but on Andromeda, it's basically not a passive. She also has Skillful Swimmer as her second exclusive passive, which is also horrible. It's 5% passive MP generation on water side. I'd rather take an Avenger passive, which is just like 2 to 3%, you know, in everywhere. And the funniest thing is that her own event, which features a chocolate river in the background of basically every farming node, doesn't actually count as water side. So she can't even use this in her own event, which is absolutely hilarious. And finally, Andromeda's MP is an AoE 6-hit quick MP that skill seals all the enemy for a single turn, that also gives herself 50% defense up for a single turn, and finally, its overcharge effect is a 3-turn AoE defense down that triggers before the MP actually does damage, that scales from 20% all the way up to 40%. So this MP is very good, in my opinion, actually. Basically, the skill seal allows all enemies to actually attack instead of using a skill into her skill 2 taunt, giving her more MP generation as well as critical damage increase from that skill effect. And the 50% defense up makes her extremely tanky whenever she actually MPs. This, especially paired up with her first skill's 1000 damage cut, is able to allow her to even take 0 damage from neutral sources sometimes if they don't have a lot of damage buffs on them. So it's really strong. And it sort of creates this positive feedback loop for her tanking game plan. Every time she MPs, the enemy attacks more, giving her more MP generation, so she gets to MP easier the next turn, and when she MPs, she makes herself very tanky, so she's able to survive damage despite herself taunting for 3 whole turns. And while all of this is happening, she can slowly ramp up her crit damage. So this MP is basically essential for her entire game plan to function. The overcharge effect is just basically a worse version of attack up ramp up, because in farming it doesn't actually ramp, it's just a 1 turn 20% attack up / defense down, but in a challenge quest this obviously does ramp up because you are hitting the same target over and over again. So how do I feel about Andromeda? Well, she certainly is a mixed bag, but unfortunately in farming she is quite underwhelming. She's just another AoE quick looper with 30 MP battery. Her damage, while not absolutely horrible, is not amazing either. It's kind of middle of the road out of all AoE riders. And she doesn't have any anti-traits to help her do extra damage against a certain group of enemies either. Her refund is also below average. In my opinion, the standard of modern AoE quick loopers are set by Senno Rikyu, Huyen Jewel, and Britomart, and all three of them can actually loop on 333 Berserkers with a maxed out Append 2, Triple Scotty, and Black Grail, albeit Huyen Jewel only barely did it. Andromeda doesn't even come close to that. She is a rider, so most of the times you will be looping casters with her, and on casters she certainly doesn't have any trouble looping with Triple Scotty and Black Grail, but you know, casters is notoriously the easiest class to loop on, so that really isn't saying much. She also doesn't have any team-wide buffs, and her battery is quite small, so compared to someone like Ushi Gozen, who also isn't an amazing looper, but she has 2 anti-earths, one in her skill and one on her MP, and a big 50 MP battery, she fits a lot easier into a multi-core composition when fighting against earth enemies, while Andromeda basically has no edge at all in that department. So overall, she's just a super mediocre AoE quick looper that you would only ever use if you really like her and you grow her to 120, for example. In terms of challenge quest performance, Andromeda did actually outperform my initial prediction because she is able to use her MP every turn a lot more consistently than I thought, and she is a lot more tanky than I thought when she is actually able to use her MP. The great combo of the 50% defense up and the 1000 damage cut essentially allows her to take 0 damage from all casters and pretenders, and even occasionally take 0 damage from neutral sources depending on how strong the neutral enemy is, and of course what CE or teammate she has, and depending on that, sometimes she can even take quite a bit of beating from berserker enemies before finishing them off. This is quite an interesting playstyle in a pure quick team, because quick traditionally doesn't have any great ways to protecting your entire team. The only protective MP you have is Scotty caster, and she doesn't have easy access to that MP, despite that MP actually being super underrated, at least in my opinion. So you can essentially build a normal quick team and have Andromeda take all of the punishment while your support stays safe, and also at the same time dishing out pretty decent damage, because now in a challenge quest, Andromeda can actually loop the defense down on her MP, as well as utilize the great amount of crit damage she has accumulated from getting hit by the enemy. Andromeda's biggest problem, in my opinion, is of course her inability to heal. So when damage is taken, it's basically gonna stick unless you have other sources of healing. A great way to remedy this, in my opinion, is to use Habertrot and use Habertrot's third skill on Andromeda. This not just buys the entire team 1 turn of basically not taking damage, it also allows Andromeda to heal back the damage she takes in the following 2 turns while she is taunted. So it's a pretty nice combo, even though the guts will basically be wasted. And if you are facing off against even tougher enemies, you can even, swap out one of the Scotties for Castoria. Castoria is not horrible with Andromeda because she has 2 arts cards, and once again, Castoria's third skill achieves something similar to Habertrot's third skill, but then you might ask, at that point, why wouldn't I just run an arts DPS? And I can't really answer you because you're absolutely correct. The unfortunate truth of tanky units these days is that Castoria is way too defensive and arts teams are just way too good at surviving that any other sort of survival tactic is just worth a lot less. So you might as well bring a more offensive arts DPS to kill the enemy faster and potentially have better survival, because when you run a full-on arts team instead of a arts quick hybrid, you have other great sustain supports such as Lady the Avalon or Tamamo that can allow your team to survive not just more damage, but also for a longer period of time. And as tanky as Andromeda can get, if the enemy is able to get a lot of attack ups to counterbalance that 50% defense up, she's gonna start feeling the pain, and because the taunt is 3 turns, she still very often gets herself killed if you bring her to the wrong boss fight, unfortunately. Once again, the guts and taunt interaction also just does not help her survive at all. But hey, you made quite a bit of clips of Andromeda soloing, right? So maybe she's better at soloing than she's in a team? Well, unfortunately, that's also not the case. Andromeda is a very interesting servant where her team play is almost identical to her solo play because she's taunted most of the times anyways, and she's taking all of the enemy's hits. So she gets better refund from damage, but she also, you know, just has more pressure from taking damage. The only difference is that in a solo, the guts isn't actually garbage, and also she has more access to all of her cards, so if she really wants to go full offensive and choose her buster card every turn and utilize that crit, she absolutely can. But her biggest problem remains the same. She doesn't have any way to heal. Obviously, you can solve that problem with Habertrot, but you can solve that problem with basically any female servant, so that really isn't saying much. That is why most of the times when I solo with her, I find the most effective way is just to boost her defense up so high with a combination of her MP and the CE to make her take no damage, because once she's taken those damage, it's very hard for her to get it back. She can only get it back from command codes and mystic codes if we don't count Habertrot. When you look at any of the other staple solo tank units, they all have some form of HP restoration. Osakabe Hime has max HP increase, which is basically a heal. Barghest Saber has max HP increase on her MP, as well as a attack on heal effect on her skill 2. Summer Bavanshi has better Garden of Avalon and also a skill that can extend the duration of her heal per turn, and she can get upwards to like 10,000 heal per turn, which is absolutely insane, by the way. And then you look at someone like Jinako, who is supposed to spam invul and never take damage, and yet she also has a heal, just like someone like Ruler Jean. So compared to some of these other archetypes, she's not nearly as tanky, and she might be a little bit more offensive than some of them because of her ability to ramp up crit damage. But on the flip side of the solo coin, these other solo units that focus more on damage rushing as well as spamming hard defense and guts are gonna easily outdamage Andromeda as well. Characters such as Tyra, Castle of Snow Herc, and even Kukulkan with the Solemn Defense and the 2x 3-turn evade have way better damage than someone like Andromeda and can finish the fight a lot easier when soloing. In conclusion, as much as I like Andromeda's design and as much as I like her very unique gimmick slash playstyle, she's just not the best at anything. She's a really disappointing AoE quick looper that almost nobody would ever use other than, you know, her most dedicated fans. And in terms of challenge quests, while her gimmick does work against certain circumstances, it's never gonna work as good as the current quote-unquote meta for challenge quests, which is just spamming arts DPSs and Castoria. Even in solos, she's stuck between 2 different major archetypes and can only excel against very certain bosses that allows her to abuse her main gimmick. So overall, she's nothing too amazing. I think they definitely could have made her numbers a little bit better, maybe give her more crits whenever she gets hit so she becomes a lot more offensive, give her a bigger damage cut so she can tank damage more reliably, or just give her better passives. Like, both of these unique passives that she has ends up being basically garbage, which is unfortunate because, you know, I've had really good experiences with the Servant. You know, I did hit pity, but then I got really lucky when I started rolling for the following copies. Her great artist, Lack Sensei, did tweet my Kamazat solo on his own Twitter, which is probably the peak of my FGO YouTube career, let's be real. So I really like her, but it's just, she's not amazing at anything, and I really struggle to even imagine a lot of situations where I will be able to take her out for a spin in the future, unfortunately. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. This is quite the negative one, but we can't always have winners, can we? But still, wish you the best of luck if you want to roll for Andromeda, and happy late Valentine's Day.